We will call to order the Tuesday, March 27th Gardner Planning Commission. Everybody please rise and join Commissioner Copeland in the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If Commissioner Roberts would lead us in roll call, please.
Roberts here.
Hop here. Manley here.
Burnett here.
Godwin here.
Copeland here.
Lavella here.
And there is a quorum present. Our only item on the consent agenda this evening is the standing approval of last month's minutes. Were there any corrections? If not, they are approved as submitted. Our first item for new business is a capital improvement plan for 2013 through 2017. The staff has a presentation, or?
Yeah.
Good evening. We've put together the capital improvement plan. It's essentially the same as last year's. The funding situation is essentially the same as last year's. It covers stormwater transportation, water supply and treatment, wastewater treatment and collection, and parks and recreation projects. All the dollars are in current dollars in a priority, presented in priority order. Full cost a year of construction. We don't take into account the spread for bonding. And grant and other funding are not included in the price. It's some projects that do show full funded includes the grants. It does not include the electric, Gardner Electric, and it's not comprehensive, and it will change from year to year. As we discussed last year, we have experienced declines in revenues, equates to reduced funding for capital improvements. Future state funding is not certain also. There's no direct funding source for stormwater projects. We've discussed off and on through the years of going to a stormwater utility, but that is not something that's in the offing in the immediate future. Start off with the water fund. The water fund is probably one of the more solvent funds we have. We do have some funding in 13 for water line replacement program to start replacing the cast iron and some of the other older lines. Another project that's funded is just upgrading the pipe systems at the Kill Creek Tower, which will improve the flow. One project that is not funded but is needed is the city owns and operates the distribution system at Conestoga Mobile Home Park, and it was installed when the park was built. It's a fairly thin pipe, and it's a liability that we have that we must address in the near future. Some other funded projects on maintenance are just to paint the interior of the 183rd Street Tower and to paint the Hillsdale plant clear well. Water Development Fund is more for expansion. There's a couple of projects that are out there. Would be good. The money request is just preliminary engineering for expansions of Hillsdale. But at this time, nothing's planned next year, even though it would be something we need to do. Wastewater Fund, sewer line replacement. Once again, we have older lines. The replacement program and the rehab program is underfunded. Wastewater Development is for expansions. Some of the items, the first one there, this was put together prior to the approval of the agreement with Edgerton last week. that will delay the need to expand the Kill Creek plant because we'll be able to divert some flow toward the new Edgerton plant. Several other projects are removing some temporary lift stations. We have approximately 20 lift stations. Many of them were because basically Gardner sits on a hill and everything flows. It basically flows out and we have to pump it back. Some of the developments required a temporary lift station, which many have been in place for 10 to 15 years. By the expansion or extension of gravity mains, you can eliminate the temporaries, which are a maintenance issue. One major project that's funded, look at it as number 11, is the White Drive Gravity Sewer. That's under design now. It's the upper reach of the interceptor sewer downstream of the Unified School District campus. Stormwater Fund, all these projects were identified during our master plan, have to compete with street projects for general fund. At this point, we do some fairly small projects, but at this point, nothing is funded. In the past, we were able to rehab the Parma drainage issue through the use of community development funds, but in the next year, in the foreseeable future, we don't have anything planned. Street Improvement Fund, this is funded from the excise tax collections. Most of those funds are obligated for existing debt. A few projects we've identified. The first two, traffic signals on Moonlight at Lincoln and Warren, we did have those in the budget. However, we reevaluated the warrants, which are required to install a signal. They were not in place yet, so we have proceeded with design of those two traffic signals, and we'll wait until the warrants are met, and then we will work to get them funded. Some projects we anticipate at some point, 183rd and Center. We're watching that intersection. Waverly Road, I guess 56 to 167th. That is just a preliminary study that would, if we had a stormwater fund, would be partially funded to develop a overall plan for that area, but at this point it's unfunded. One project that we will probably be able to slide in sooner than later is the Cedar, Niles, and Santa Fe intersection. What is shown is the addition of another turn lane for northbound. It was designed to have a double left. That's something we can do fairly inexpensively with some signal changes. We may be able to pull that off this year. Our plan is to look at it very seriously. The Special Highway Fund is our only source of street improvements. The street rehab program, so I can show you if perfect world, if we were on about a 10-year cycle nominally, you'd see first 10 years, that would be the number of streets we'd be working on. With the funding we have, and that's about what we're able to pull off. If you go back to the Special Highway Fund, once again, it's our only source. In 2013, we're showing the Center and Main intersection, which is where we're coming up with the local funds. The bulk of that project is being funded through a grant from Kansas Department of Transportation, which will fund 100% of construction. Furthermore, we're able to reduce the city's liability through a federal funds exchange program through KDOT. So our actual out-of-pocket for that project is very low. Another project shown is 167th Street guardrail and realignment. There's a curve in the road on 167th, just west of Waverly. We'll straighten that out and put some guardrail up. The Capital Improvement Reserve Fund is used to fund building projects and parks projects. One of the projects we would like to see in 13, which isn't funded, is to upgrade the HVAC system. That's is to install a computerized control system. Currently, the City Hall is controlled by 27 thermostats. We have numerous zones fighting each other. If we went to a centralized control system, we'd be able to reduce our energy costs. Parks and Recreation has a number of projects that they would like to see. None of them are funded at this time. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Do we have any questions at this time? This will be a public hearing, so we will open that up to the public here in a few minutes as well. So does any commissioners have any questions at this time? Okay.
Thank you.
And since this is scheduled for a public hearing, at this time, if anybody from the public would like to come and ask questions or make any comments regarding this item, please come forward. Without seeing any, I believe a motion is in order to close the public hearing.
I move that we close the hearing.
Again.
It's been moved by Commissioner Manley and seconded by Commissioner Lavella to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? Not all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Are there any further questions? Otherwise, our action is to make sure and see if it's in conformity with the adopted comprehensive plan, and then whether or not we approve the capital improvement plan. Any questions, comments? I think that we've discussed the funding and stuff in the past. Lack thereof.
Yeah.
This will get forwarded to the council. I'm sorry, this isn't working. So if you could make sure that and say to forward to council.
Mr. Chair, I vote that we go ahead and approve the capital improvement plan 2013 to 2017 for the city of Gardner and find the plan is in conformity with the adopted comprehensive plan of 2008 and forward to the city council for approval.
Second. It's been moved by Commissioner Pop and seconded by Commissioner Copeland to approve the capital improvement plan. Find that it is in conformity with the adopted comprehensive plan 2008 and forward to city council. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Our second item this evening is the amendments to the Title 18 pertaining to the outdoor storage. We also will conduct a public hearing after the staff presentation.
Okay, this is, we've already talked about back in January, but just going to go through it again. Outdoor storage currently is allowed in industrial districts, provided that it's screened from adjacent streets and residential areas with a solid or semi-solid fence. However, no definitions are provided for outdoor storage or the fencing. Is storage of vehicles, would that be considered a parking lot or a storage lot? That's one of the questions that we've been asked a lot lately by businesses wanting to build and store vehicles. Parking lots require paving, and then if we do define a storage lot, right now it's not clear. Is that different from a parking lot? Does it need to be paved? Those types of issues. There are some concerns that more regulations are needed for outdoor storage, especially near residential areas, as a lot of our industrial districts are adjacent to residential. And this would also help applicants know what to expect without having disagreements over interpretation of ambiguous language. Some of the issues with outdoor storage are aesthetics. while it is required to be screened from rights-of-way in residential areas due to topography, height of materials, and maintenance of the storage area, there could still be issues. Noise, lighting, and water quality and environmental impacts. Some possible mitigation techniques would include appropriate zoning transitions. As I already mentioned, currently most of our industrial districts are adjacent to residential areas. As far as aesthetics go, additional screening, maybe requiring a solid fence as opposed to a semi-solid fence, or requiring landscaping. Another option would be to restrict the height of materials stored as far as how high they're stacked, and to enforce property maintenance. For noise, you could restrict the type and hours of operation of equipment. You could do a dense landscaping buffer to help mitigate noise. For lighting, direct it downwards, which our regulations already require. For water quality and environmental impacts, require containment around items that can impact water quality. So these could be enforced either through a special use permit or additional regulations or some combination of the two. As far as the surfacing goes, gravel is less costly to construct and maintain. It's one of its main benefits. However, if it is allowed, there may be other issues. It does actually require more maintenance, even though it is less expensive to maintain. Dust could cause air quality issues for adjacent and downwind properties. Stormwater impacts, while it is a pervious surface, it's more difficult to direct stormwater, and there are possible environmental concerns depending on what is actually stored on the gravel. At the City Council work session back on October 10th of 11, outdoor storage, we asked them, should it be allowed by right with a special use permit or be prohibited entirely? And at that time, the council felt, 4 of the 5 felt that it should require a special use permit. 1 thought it should be allowed by right. As far as gravel surface for the storage area, no one thought it should be allowed by right. 3 thought a special use permit, and 2 thought it should be prohibited entirely. They did initiate amendments on October 17th for the Planning Commission to discuss these issues further and come up with new regulations to address them, recognizing that this discussion would happen at the Planning Commission in more detail. So the Planning Commission discussed this on January 24th of this year. One of the things that we looked at was that most other cities in the county do allow outdoor storage in industrial districts by right, but they do have additional requirements such as a hard surface and that they have to be fully screened. So staff and the PC, the Planning Commission all agreed that it would be best to follow a similar type of standard, allowing it by right with certain restrictions, but then to allow deviations from that as long as they get a special use permit. So the regulations that were proposed before you tonight, we advertised for the public hearing with specific chapters and did not include the chapter for rules and definitions. So those would actually be added at a later date, not tonight. But I did put the proposed definitions on the screen. I've got a star next to the first one because those numbers, the 50 and 97%, are up for discussion, not necessarily recommended for those specific numbers. Our current regulations actually, while they don't define it, there's an implication that 80% would be the minimum for a semi-solid fence. So that's something that we would discuss further at the time those were adopted. Then for the actual amendments that would be approved or forwarded for approval tonight, the first would be for the use limitations in the M1 zoning district, and this would add all operations and activities shall be conducted within a building or buildings. Storage may be maintained outside said buildings with approval of a site plan and provided it meets the following requirements. So you have location criteria, which require that it shall not be located within the front yard. The storage area would need to be set back at least 100 feet from all residential zoning districts and 15 feet from all non-industrial zoning districts. It should not be located any closer than 15 feet to a street or right-of-way. No portion of the storage area would be allowed within any utility easements or floodplain area. Additionally, the storage area would be required to be paved per the requirements for parking lots with curb and gutter. The storage area would be enclosed on all sides by a solid fence or wall at least 6 feet but not more than 8 feet high. Trees and shrubs would be planted adjacent to the outside of the fence per the recommendations of the Gardner Design Standards, which currently don't address landscaping, but that's next on your agenda to discuss tonight. The Planning Commission may at its discretion approve a semi-solid fence for portions of the storage yard that are not visible from rights-of-way or non-industrial properties within 300 feet. Materials shall not be stacked or piled higher than the height of the fence. Planning Commission may require additional screening, for example, landscaping for stored items that are large enough to exceed the height of the fence, and any deviation from the requirements would require a special use permit. And then you have the same thing in the M2 district. Then for accessory uses, for special and conditional uses, we would add that all outside storage must be screened from view off the premises and meet the use limitations for outside storage in the M2 district. Then we would have for special uses listed as one of these special uses, outdoor storage that does not meet the use limitations for the zoning district, subject to following requirements. The first would be zoning, would only be allowed for industrial uses. And then still requiring paving unless the Planning Commission determines that gravel surface is appropriate due to the location and the nature of the operation. If gravel is to be permitted, you'd have type and thickness, minimum thickness of 6 inches. Applicant would be required to submit a dust control plan subject to approval by city staff to control dust migration from the site. So staff does recommend that you conduct the public hearing and then forward the amendments to the City Council with the recommendation of approval.
There were 2 or 3 items for us to discuss, and I think that would probably be appropriate to discuss that after the public hearing. So are there any questions right now for staff before we start the public hearing? Thank you. At this time, we would like to open the public hearing regarding the amendments to Title 18 pertaining to outdoor storage. If you could please step up to the microphone and list your name and address for the record.
My name is Jim Kohlenor, and I am an officer with Gardner Bank, which is located 840 East Main here in Gardner. I have somewhat of a vested interest in this topic in that the bank owns a property I think you're all familiar with on Moonlight Road, just immediately north of I-35. That property has been zoned as an industrial property for a long time, prior to any really of the other developments that have come into that area. So really, if anything, that property has been encroached upon by residential properties. And I feel like some of these are being last to develop, are being, punished somewhat by those things. We had a contract to sell one of the lots that this body approved, a preliminary plat, excuse me if my terminology is off, on after a certain amount of discussion and beating and around, and thought we had a workable, we as the seller were involved in that. One of the contingencies was that the plat be approved, and which a plat was approved, not as it was submitted, but the amendments as are being presented here, I read as being quite a bit more restrictive than what was approved in that plat. That buyer did not close on the contract. The reason given to us was that they weren't comfortable that they could work with City of Gardner in the completion of the project. And we've been told that they're currently looking to buy property in other communities in the Johnson County area to do the exact same thing. So I guess my concern is that you know, here's property and you know, in light that this body twice recommended that the zoning be changed and twice the City Council voted that down, we are still left with an industrially zoned property and that it allowed to be developed, you know, within that zoning. And I guess the special use permit, I understand how that works and feel somewhat comfortable that is a viable solution as long as those special uses may be viewed not as, you know, slim and none, and slim already left town if those opportunities would come. You know, I have no idea what any future buyers, developers of that land might want to do. They may have no interest at all in outdoor storage lots, but in the event that they would, you know, under the guidelines that had been in place, you know, I would hate to see that materially changed to be more strict. Questions I'd be happy to answer as well. If not, that's what I have.
Thank you. And we do welcome your comments, so thank you. Are there any other comments from the public at this time?
I move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Manley and seconded by Commissioner Pop to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. We will close the public hearing at this time. Are there any comments, any questions? I know that we had a couple items from staff that we would like to go through.
Where did you want to start?
You had the two items you wanted us to discuss, or three. You had the slide that, on the definitions, I believe. On fences. Any questions or comments? This is still an item that we do not have to decide this evening, but I think that staff is looking for some guidance from us on this item.
My only question is, how do we measure a 97% opaque fence? Or even an 80% opaque fence? I mean, I know it's kind of ambiguous, but we're going to be setting a standard here, and I'm curious as to how staff plans to monitor that, I guess you might say.
And honestly, that's a question I've always had with the current regulations as well. But looking through and seeing what other cities do, they all have pretty much the exact same type of regulations with the percentage of it being opaque. You know, what I'm thinking is, you know, you get them to show a section and then have them actually monitor or provide, you know, the detail of what it comes out to as far as, you know, from a straight-on perspective, what you can see through and what you can't.
I would venture to guess a 97% opaque fence is pretty close to solid. I learned a lot about opaque stuff lately with shades, interior shades, and how a 97% is a lot different than a 90%. So I'm just trying to figure out if we're gonna have something like this, maybe an 80%. We imply 80%, but you know, anything over 80% would be considered solid. I'm not sure how that would work.
Well, maybe a way to look at this too is to say that, you know, that what we have there for the percentage for the semi-solid fence gives the person the option that if they essentially want to provide basically a solid fence, that they actually have the option to. So we're saying you can provide basically almost a fully solid fence, or you can go all the way down as far as 50%.
Well, I'm thinking 50 to 75% would mean a semi-solid fence, and anything over 75 would be considered a solid fence.
But I mean, the definition is saying that, yeah, that 80 is okay, or 75 is okay, and it's, you know what I'm saying? In any case, I would say, especially if you're trying to go for some sort of screening, that you really would want that number to be as high as possible. So, I mean, I say leave the flexibility, and if the person wants to put almost a solid fence up, when they by right could actually put one that's 50, I say let's leave it in there, and if they want to pay for it, go ahead. That's my opinion on it, but I don't know.
It's probably a flexible item, since it would require planning commission approval to go to a semi-solid, and it's only at a portion of the site where it's not viewable by R1 within 300 feet. So I think there's still plenty of controls on how that's done anyways. I think it's requiring solid fence. Planning commission may approve alternatives if it sees fit.
Well, I'm just looking for something for staff to be able to say, okay, yeah, that'll qualify as a solid fence, or not. You know, we say 97% opaque, but they don't show anything to say that they're putting up an opaque fabric that says it's on a chain link that says it's 80% opaque, like an 80% opaque fabric. But when you add the fence in on that, now you're approaching 97% or whatever, but you can still see through the fence. Is that considered an opaque fence or not? That's what I mean, I know I'm grasping, or not really grasping, but I'm trying to play the part of saying, here's a fence, we're going to put a screen, you know, a fabric behind it that's going to give it the perception of being an opaque fence, but really it's not. So does that make us come back and say, that she forwards it to us and says, now you guys get to decide that? Is that my assumption that we're going to have to do? Does she have to do that all the time? Or can she make the decision as far as, no, that's not an opaque fence, that's not what we consider an opaque fence?
The more direction I have up front, the better, because people don't like it when they get to planning commission and all of a sudden it changes.
Exactly.
My question is it opaque or is it not? And if you can see through it, it's not opaque.
But it still meets 97%. If they can prove that it meets 97%, but you can still see through it. I mean, that's what I'm getting at, is I know that there's a lot of fabrics out there that look like it's opaque, but you can still see through it.
Yeah.
And Dan, the fabrics that you,
Not opaque.
Exactly.
the fabrics that you see that say they're 80 or 90% opaque, is that information provided by the manufacturer?
It's provided by the manufacturer, but there's no standard between any one of them. Somebody could say it's 90% and the other person has the same stuff, but they say it's 95 or
Okay.
75 or whatever. There's no standard by which to say what's 90%. So I found that out on a lot of stuff. So
Do they use a lot of opaque fabrics for this?
a lot of the larger like Lowe's for one, Walmart, if a jurisdiction requires a solid fence or not to be screened outdoor garden center, there are several companies out there that make a fabric that you put on the back side of the fence that is like a mesh, and it has varying degrees of opacity. So, and
With everything that you've just recently learned about all this. Do you have a suggestion for?
I'm saying, if you're gonna make a distinction between what is a solid fence and what is a semi-solid fence, make it a significant difference.
Like it can't be fabric?
Well, yeah, you can say that if you want to. So,
Well,
what I'm saying is
just
that
throwing it out there because to me
you say
that's-
75%, you
Yeah.
say 75% is a semi-solid fence. Okay? Anything over a 75%, but we still should give her, or staff, something to say, like she had pointed out, like a form of some sort, say, okay, now prove to me that your fence is 75% or 80%.
You could have a similar problem, a lot of people do for their fences in their backyards, where
Mhm.
they've got the slats on both sides that
Shadow.
are separated.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're standing and just looking straight at it, you can't see through it, but as you're driving down the road, you can see their entire yard.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's where,
That's not opaque.
exactly, but is that 75%?
But it would meet the definition the way I had said how we would measure it.
Exactly. So, and I know we're nitpicking at these things, but being on that side of the podium, I'm gonna try to, and I hate to say this, but I'm gonna try to exploit everything I can to get what my client wants.
Well, first of all, I'd say fabric should not be allowed. That takes care of that one.
Next. Okay. So,
It needs to be a solid material, it needs to be a presentable fencing, common fencing material. It can't be what they use for a 30-foot exterior storage screening. I mean, that's something that, you can't put a wood slat fence that's 30 feet tall to screen a Lowe's
but you can put a chain
storage
link,
area.
but you can put a chain link fence with slats in it. Now, is that considered a
I
opaque
don't like
fence
that idea
or not?
personally.
I don't like that
Personally, I
either.
do not like that idea. That's no better than the fabric. It should be a solid surfacing material. It should be either wood slats or it should be,
So here's my thought is saying, if it's gonna be a solid fence, it's 100% opaque, period, from all sides. Don't give the 2% rule, and a semi-solid fence means you can see through it, to whatever varying degree that
anything less,
it is,
yeah.
you can see through it.
Mhm.
Whether it's from the front, the side, the angle, the top, the bottom, whatever, it's still a fence that you can see through, and it's semi-solid.
And then under that scenario, if it doesn't meet a solid fence, then we would have to act and approve it on a case-by-case basis.
Mm-hmm.
What could be a solid fence then, other than cinder blocks? I mean,
Yeah.
a picket fence, when the wood shrinks, is gonna have 2% or more visibility
Yeah.
through it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay.
I think
It
even
makes
a,
sense.
Well, I think
even a
they
fence
can
with,
do it.
with slats on both sides, I mean, if I walk up and look through it, yeah, I could see, inside, but
For the most part.
So your slats have to overlap.
I
Make this
understand
real
the
expensive.
2% rule. I understand that with the wood shrinking and so on, that makes sense. So, I mean,
We can caulk 'em.
So maybe instead of doing a percentage opaque, it's a fence that, effectively screens all view, aside from perhaps the narrow little split between the slats, would be opaque, and then it provides some screening, but not full screening. It would be semi-solid, and something like chain link wouldn't be even semi-solid.
correct. Now, if we're saying semi-solid, then that means, and by that definition, we're pretty much eliminating chain link fences as fencing material, period. Are we not?
Chain link without
Or
slats.
outdoor storage areas.
For outdoor storage areas.
Well, Amy said the word slat, the little slit between the slats.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how wide can we do that? If I want a 3-inch slit, we're still talking about a slit between the slats. I mean, we'd have to define what we're talking about with opaque. Is a fence where the slats are next to each other, or 1/8 of an inch? What if they're 1/4 or 1/2? I mean, that's.
Personally, I'd like to see some examples of that and have us kind of look at that.
And maybe that's where you do throw in your 98% or
Mhm.
whatever is, it's cannot count as a solid fence if it's not at least 98% opaque.
Really? Would a, question I have is, would a chain link fence with the slats, either vertical or diagonal, would the spaces that are left in that meet the 98%? I want to set the limit just above that.
That's where I set this, was based on my research of how opaque different advertisers were advertising that their chain link fence with slats were in the 90s. And then once you got up to 98%, that seemed to eliminate chain link with slats.
Well, couldn't you even modify the definition to say a solid fence must be 98% opaque?
And not chain
This would
link.
exclude chain link with slat
Not fabric, not.
and fabric.
Yeah,
98.5.
without the special approval, so.
Yeah.
Because there may be places that is appropriate, so. I don't think we want to tie ourselves down.
Right.
And then they,
I think that's,
in addition to the fabric and the slats, they also have the bamboo, what do you call it? Mr. Potts,
I know what you're talking about, and I,
it's like bamboo slats
yeah.
that you roll out.
For your
along
tiki
with-
room.
Right.
So, I mean, there's
Oh.
all sorts of different types of products out there, so, I mean, maybe you're looking at, maybe you're okay with that, or maybe you're not, and if you wanna just say no chain link with fabric slats or anything, or,
Well, by saying no chain link, I mean, I guess what we're trying to
or
do
in
is,
the definition of a solid fence, not saying
okay,
it's prohibited in the city, but it does not count as a solid fence, no matter what type of screening solution is used to make it more opaque.
I think the
This
chairs.
is for your public rights-of-way issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe that's appropriate, personally. We still have the option when we're bordering other industrial sites. No residential within view of 300 feet, which is still fairly close, quite frankly. To be reducing your amount of screening. I think it should be a high quality, very opaque fencing. If you're going to put that within that kind of a distance of residential district. We still have the option of reducing it if it meets the requirements, to reduce the requirement if need be. But we have the guidelines to go through on that too. We have the distance, the view requirements. Okay. So,
Just for reference purposes, I believe it's roughly 300 feet from right here to the corner, the center of the main. Approximately. Don't look.
The next two bullets, do you have enough information, or I believe that probably needs to have a little bit more discussion, or at least on my end, as far as examples, or other commissioners feel that way as well, once we see that, or?
Yeah, this.
The definitions
just a reminder,
is
the
not
definition is not
tied to this, so.
tonight, but yeah, if you have any comments or suggestions, we would love to hear those now.
are there existing definitions that will remain until we review the definitions for this section?
No, currently none of this is defined.
Okay. So this.
In the meantime, we use the standard dictionary definition if it ever comes up.
Okay.
I believe we have quite a bit of precedence in this area as well, that things that we've discussed as well, so.
Sure. So you had said something about auto storage, or autos, I think.
I think those are kind of the next two bullets, is that what you were looking at?
She had mentioned something about the autos, and I'm sitting here thinking, I'm looking at the third definition, it says equipment, vehicles, trailers, or materials for a period of time longer than will be involved in normal day-to-day use or consumption. I think that's considered storage. I don't care what it is, it's still storage.
Right.
And this only applies to the M1 and M2,
Well, the definitions would apply to the entire zoning code.
the entire zone. Okay. Okay, then we have to look at commercial stuff. These applying to a commercial standard. Because I know that Ace Hardware stores a lot of their stuff outside. A lot of their bricks, so does Walmart.
And currently, our regulations for commercial districts say you cannot have any outdoor storage except for, I forget the exact wording, display of merchandise on sale to the public. So those are allowed because they're considered displays of merchandise as opposed to stored products. Now, there's a very fine line there clearly with some
Yes.
of these businesses.
That's what I'm wanting to say, that, because I know some of that stuff's been out there for quite a while.
If you can go up and buy it, it would meet the definition.
That's true.
And that would also include, any types of like greenhouse plants, those type of things as well that come and go throughout the seasons.
So, looking at the term storage, the definition, we should still be okay in the commercial side of things for, or do we need to add something in there to also indicate, I know it says day-to-day use or consumption of the same, but we do address that in the commercial zoning about quote-unquote outdoor storage. Okay. As long as we have it in the commercial side, then we also talk about that at that time, and then we're just trying to define the term storage. Okay.
Any questions or comments on the third or fourth bullet, while we're talking about storage?
Sorry. The last sentence, such areas, or the last two sentences about the last bullet. Such areas typically do not have a roof, however, a storage area covered by a roof but not enclosed by walls shall be considered outdoor storage. What if it's attached to the building and it has walls on two sides? Is that still outdoor storage or not? And I only say that because there's a certain retailer out there that has that exact item, and by the building code, it's considered part of the building. It's not considered outdoor storage if it's underneath there.
Well, we can clarify that in the definition. I guess the question I would have for the planning commission is, do you want that to be included as outdoor storage or not?
For the
Maybe
purposes,
if it's more than 50% surrounded by walls, it's indoor, and if it's less than 50%, it's outdoor, or...
I would consider it if it's open on any one side.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's open to
Means that
view,
If it's open to
then
view.
it's outside storage for the purposes of screening. That's what we're addressing here.
Mhm.
If it's viewable from the outside, then it's outside storage
Correct.
and needs to be screened appropriately.
I would probably reword that to say that, you know, open on any one side or something to that degree.
Even if something had 3 walls and the only thing was open, and it's just the front that's open, you'd count that as outdoor storage?
Well, you can still see it.
That one side would need to be screened according to outside storage.
With black opaque mesh.
There you go.
Exactly.
Or tiki bamboo.
Tiki bamboo.
That seems aggressive to me.
Well, and that's why I'm saying that is because, like I said, there are certain places out there that have these things attached to the building for that very reason. Because it's Jones County Bus Barn's one that it's not attached to the building, but it's out in the middle and it's all covered and you got all the buses underneath there. So is that considered outdoor storage? Yes, by this definition. But there are several places that have covers over the top of their storage stuff, so it keeps them out of the weather, per se, but it's still open on the end. to allow for easy access. So it's inside yet it's out. So, I mean, if it's screened from view from the public right-of-way, then I don't see there being any reason to allow that there, but I think we need to clarify that a little bit more, or put some sort of a caveat on it.
If these items are out for sale, they're not gonna be screened from the public, so they couldn't.
Not necessarily that, I'm just saying, the stuff I'm talking about is actually stuff that they use. So it's outside, underneath the roof, but it's open on two sides.
An example I can think of is like a hardware store will allow material that's not actually the part that's moved out for sale.
Racks.
Not displayed, it's racks of stuff that's coming in, that it would not be set out on the floor per se. And
Correct.
it wouldn't necessarily have storage space because it's seasonal in the rear of the facility for it. I can think of a couple that would fall into that, in the hardware store area.
Maybe I'm not thinking of this correctly. Could this create a citation issue for like a Jiffy Lube type place that had dock doors open on the front and the back of the building, and a codes enforcer comes by and says you either need to shut those or you're going to get a ticket because you're not properly screened?
I was gonna ask the same question.
Well, that's not,
Yeah.
they're not
No.
storing those vehicles, those are coming through, they're servicing them, and then they're leaving. If they had their bay doors open and they had vehicles that they were storing in there, then that would be a different situation, I think. That's clearly not storage, to me.
And I agree, because I mean, you're closing it up and it's inside the building at some point. What I think they're talking about here is if you've got a roof but there's no walls around it.
Yeah, I understand what you're trying to prevent. I want to keep it from being too restrictive.
I agree with you.
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
especially in a retail, commercial type setting, that item, I mean, those items come in and out all the time. For us to
Yeah.
try and regulate those and say you have to screen it may be excessive.
Well, I mean,
Then outdoor storage is not allowed in commercial districts. We're talking about industrial districts here.
well,
Yeah.
where I work, where my building is, it's an industrial park, and I mean, it's a very nice industrial park, and all of the buildings have dock doors on the back, and on nice days, my guys like to raise the dock doors in the warehouse, which is storage. I mean, it's stored materials, and you may drive by at any given time, and the entire back of the building, which can be seen from the right-of-way, is open. You know,
I think you'd have a hard time with the codes enforcement guy proving that that's outdoor storage, because it's physically inside the building. Even though you have dock doors that are open, it's still physically inside the building.
by the definition, though, one side of the building is open.
Yeah, I think what Commissioner Pop's getting at is that you've got one or two or three sides to the building, and you've got storage underneath a roof, but you have nothing that you can close on the other side
Exactly.
that's exposed to the public view.
No way.
That's what needs to be screened. That would be, there's no wall, there's no door to close. I don't think we're trying to be so restrictive
No.
that if you have a warehouse and you want to open up the doors because it's a nice, cool day and it's hot inside the warehouse, right? I don't think we're trying to get to that point. I don't think we're getting to that point. I think we're very clear here with the fact that even though it might be covered by a roof,
Mhm.
if it has no walls, I'd say even on one side, that's outside storage.
Maybe you just say it's storage area, it's not fully enclosed. You know, a storage area covered by a roof but not fully enclosed by walls shall be considered outdoor storage.
And I think you have 7 reasonable minds on this panel that are going to look at that, and from one view, it's inside storage, great. You don't have to do the screening requirements for that, just because the other side is. But that other side's gonna trigger this, where we want screening, because that's outside storage. So, I think we're good, and tweaking that would be fine.
I just think adding the word fully enclosed by walls should be considered outdoor storage. I mean, that's my opinion.
Right, because if it's partially enclosed, then you could say, oh, it is enclosed. Partial full. So, I agree with you, adding the word fully would